Although the First Order's military vehicles are some of the most powerful that ever existed within the galaxy, when it comes to originality of design, they don't score very well. It seems that with every new release of a First Order military vehicle, its visual connections to those craft of the Empire are clearly evident. Whether it be the connections between the Resurgent-class Battlecruiser and the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, the First Order TIE Fighters and those of the Empire, or the TIE Silencer and the TIE Interceptor and TIE Advanced, the First Order's military vehicles look similar to those that comprise the Empire's fleet that preceded it. In this video expose, I want to examine the reasons why the First Order's military vehicles look so similar to the Empire's from an in-universe perspective, rather than explaining it from the point of view of natural technology progression, or the reasonable desire for Disney to want their audience to easily connect antagonists from trilogy to trilogy. In this regard, I'll be focusing primarily on the shared manufacturing lineage that the First Order shared with the Empire, the fact that the Empire's military officers and technologists were among those who fled into the unknown regions to start the First Order, and the psychological factor that the First Order wished to achieve through their designs. Let's first start with the manufacturing lineage shared by the two galactic powers. It makes perfect sense that the First Order's military vehicles would look so similar to those of the Empire when the corporations who built the Empire's starships were the same as those who would ultimately manufacture the First Order's fleet. The visual similarities of the First Order's TIE Fighters and the Imperial TIEs, as well as the TIE Silencer and the TIE Advanced and Interceptor, aren't surprising when one realizes that these ships were manufactured for the First Order by Sinar-Jaemus Fleet Systems. This company spawned from the infamous starship manufacturer Sinar Fleet Systems. Sinar Fleet Systems had previously been one of the leading starship manufacturers for the Galactic Empire, designing and producing the Imperial TIE line of starfighters. Following the fall of the Empire, after the signing of the Galactic Concordance, Sinar Fleet Systems reorganized into Sinar-Jaemus to avoid the restrictions placed upon the corporation by the treaty. Therefore, the corporation that designed and manufactured the TIE Fighter, TIE Interceptor, and TIE Advanced for the Empire was for all purposes the same corporation that designed and manufactured the TIE Fighters and TIE Silencer for the First Order, with a clear lineage between the First Order and the Empire. The same is true regarding the First Order's Resurgent-class Battlecruisers, which were manufactured by a company called Kuat and Tralla Engineering. Kuat and Tralla, like Sinar-Jaemus, spawned from the infamous Imperial capital ship manufacturer Kuat Drive Yards. Kuat Drive Yards, in combination with its subsidiary Rothana Heavy Engineering, produced some of the most well-known and prominent starships of the Imperial fleet, including the Imperial-class Star Destroyer. Again, we see that the same corporation that was heavily involved in the design and manufacturing of the Imperial-class Star Destroyer was also involved in the production of the First Order's Resurgent-class vehicles. Therefore, given that the First Order shared a manufacturing lineage with the Empire, and the same corporations that were used by the Empire were later adopted by the First Order, it makes sense why the First Order's military vehicles look so similar to that of the Empire's. It wouldn't make sense for these corporations to completely dismiss all of the designs previously used by the Empire. It's perfectly reasonable that they would utilize the base designs and then make the necessary upgrades that advances in technology allowed for, which is exactly what these corporations did for the First Order. Aside from the shared manufacturing lineage between the First Order and the Empire, it also makes sense that the starfighters and capital ships of the two galactic powers were visually similar, given that many of the engineers, technologists, and military officers that fled to the unknown regions to form the First Order were previously Imperial. Although the First Order grew within the unknown regions, separate and distant from the known galaxy that was once dominated by the Empire, it's necessary to remember that the Empire's legacy survived through the exodus of these former Imperial personnel. Again, because they had their roots firmly within the Empire, it's reasonable that these engineers and technologists would prefer to develop starships that were based upon those of the Empire, rather than trying to develop anything completely new from scratch. This would have also benefited the military officers, as it would have been easier to learn and teach new recruits on vehicles that they were already relatively familiar with, thereby greatly decreasing the learning curve for a new order that was relatively vulnerable in its early days within the unknown regions. Given that the First Order's first engineers, technologists, and military personnel were plucked straight from the ranks of the former Empire, it makes sense that they would prefer the starship designs that they were already familiar with, thereby resulting in military vehicles that closely resembled those of the Empire. Finally, the lack of resources among the First Order, in terms of financial, personnel, and material resources, also explains why their military vehicles look so similar to those of the Empire. While it's important that these lack of resources meant that the First Order wouldn't have the ability to test out every new design that they thought was promising, and would push them to rely more upon the designs that the previously mentioned corporations and the former Imperial personnel were more familiar with, more important is the fact that the deficiency in resources forced them to rely less on sheer numbers and more upon psychological warfare. Because they weren't able to construct a seemingly endless number of Resurgent-class capital ships, like the Empire was able to do with their Imperial-class Star Destroyers, the First Order had to make more with less. In this regard, they decided that making their capital ships and starfighters appear similar to those previously deployed by the Empire would give them the psychological advantage once they emerged from the unknown regions to wage war against the New Republic. Although they wouldn't have the numbers, the First Order hoped that they would demoralize the New Republic and its citizens by hearkening back to an age where the galaxy was dominated by the Empire. Therefore, in adopting designs for their starships that were similar to those used by the Empire, the First Order hoped to emulate the psychological factor of the Imperial ships, thereby giving them the advantage in the conflict. So there we have it! Why First Order military vehicles look so similar to the Empire's. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions? Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. If not for me,